Welcome to Season 1 of the PMO Community Podcast series. I am Aina Alive, and I'm excited to guide you through another thought-provoking conversation in our series, which is a part of our unique book writing challenge, focused on PMO leadership and value-driven project management. Today, I'm joined by Farahana Jobanputra, an expert in establishing PMOs, centers of excellence, and centers of governance across industries such as asset management, insurance, and capital markets. Farahana brings a wealth of experience in managing complex technical transformations and aligning teams through data-driven decision-making. In this episode, we will explore how companies can assess whether a centralized or federated PMO structure best fits their needs, with real-world examples of organizations navigating their decisions. Strategies to shift the PMO's perception from administrative overhead to a strategic asset. Then we will move on to how PMOs act as a critical function in risk management and navigating regulatory challenges, and methods for supporting portfolio prioritization to ensure alignment with long-term business goals, even in uncertain economic conditions. Then we will talk about practical examples of PMO-led initiatives driving continuous improvement and maturity building. Key KPIs that PMOs should track to demonstrate business value and support decision-making. And insights from a Canadian bank transformation led by a PMO that improved compliance and operational performance. Join us as we delve into these key topics and more with Farahana, sharing actionable advice for PMO leaders driving strategic success across organizations. Hi, Farahana. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, let's get it started. So, Farahana, based on your chapter, when deciding between a centralized or federated PMO structure, how should companies assess which model fits their specific needs? And please, can you share a specific example of a company navigating this decision?
Sure. So I think there's two fundamental things here, right? So centralized PMOs tend to work well where the project management practice is small, tight-knit, and is either at very early stages of maturity or very, very well-defined late stages of maturity. They tend to work best where we have PMO teams that roll up under one single leader. And under the centralized banner, there's one single authority for project policies, standards, methodologies, governance, reporting, and so on. Typically, it works well on either side of the scale, where work is either small in scale, consistent, has a routine level of complexity and size, or it's where the team is still kind of storming and forming, trying to figure out their operational norms, or trying to figure out like how they want to function and the expectation of needing to scale up in the future. Federated PMOs tend to be somewhat different. So they tend to work well where there might be many authorities for project policies, standards, methodologies, reporting, and so on. Those resources may fall under different lines of business or have distinct practices that are specific to those organizations or sub-organizations within a broader firm. There's specialization within like either a service line, product line, technology offering, or organizational alignment. Or there might be highly discrete, highly unique pieces of work. So for example, a lawyer might consider a project being registering a security or completing a corporate action. And that project might follow a very different, distinct methodology from, say, putting up a building or acquiring a new affiliate through an M&A process. So in that way, you can see there's two different models. What works best tends to be for bank type or larger organizations, particularly public organizations, seems to be some form of a hybrid. So in those contexts, there's an ePMO or an enterprise PMO that holds, the standards, the minimum practices that must be followed. And then federated, a form of federated subsidiary PMOs that would have delegated authority so that they have the flexibility to design the work that meets their team's work or practices and modes of operations best.
Thank you, Farhana. And we know that PMOs normally are established in the large-scale businesses. And also in the last 10 or 15 years, many businesses went to the large-scale transformations, and also in the context of large-scale PMO transformations. What are some practical strategies you've used to shift perceptions of the PMO from the administrative overhead to a strategic asset?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So when we look at organizations, any organization, it doesn't matter what they do, teams within a company tend to be split between two kind of categories. One is revenue generators, so like your sales team or your relationship managers that are trying to increase market share and really like drive more assets towards the business and drive profitability. And then cost centers or what some teams called administrative teams or operational teams. And it's really important that within those administration or operational teams, that they still demonstrate value. Increasingly in today's environment, it's really important that business teams that are on the cost category side, that they look at how are they articulating value beyond just we're keeping the lights on. So for example, for a PMO, I would recommend that leaders get out of a mindset of thinking of, we've done, 10 projects that had an investment of $10 million, and instead think of it like, oh, we're protecting the organization, we're driving cost optimization, we're aligning to strategic targets, and really think about what are the things that this organization serves or the reasons why the organization exists, be it a bank, or a construction company or like a food distributor, regardless of what it is. And really think of why does this company exist? What are the driving factors? And then how do we represent how we're meeting those strategic goals? And I think also having really competent PMs moves us out of just an administrative, we follow the process, to actually being more thought leaders and thinking about how do we optimize services as well.
I want actually to dig a little bit deeper in the topic of long-term business goals and prioritization. So, Farhana, how can a PMO better support portfolio prioritization and ensure projects that they are aligned with long-term business goals, and especially in like nowadays in times of economic uncertainty?
Yeah, so it's for PMO leaders, it's really important that we get very close to our stakeholders. As any organizational leader, we never want to be the person that has to go to our teams and start speaking about efficiency targets or be the one who delivered news about headcount reductions. That's not why any leader shows up at work. So we need to demonstrate values. And I think the way we do that is we get close to our stakeholders, we get really close to drivers for project delivery, be it that we're serving, a regulatory need, a market need, a strategic need. And really, we have to stay very close to our projects as well. So there's strategies that we can do in looking at our project scope. We should try to understand what is MVP, what are our minimum viable product, what are things that are the minimum standard for delivery, and then also look at where are projects in the life cycle. During any project or during any year, as leaders, we're always stuck with competing priorities. We're always adapting to different environments. And so it should be the expectation in a leadership seat that you will need to restructure, re-optimize the portfolio. So getting close to sponsors, getting close to road mapping, really understanding scope, really understanding dependencies and skill sets, and also understanding your own team and your own cost drivers and your own KPIs will help leaders prove that adaptability, and will also, to go back to your earlier question, go back to how do we move out of being an administrative function to really being a value add. So as a leader, things I've done is look at dependencies. So say, what are similar projects? Are they touching a similar technology? Can we dial up scope on one area to dial down scope on another? I look at things like where is the project in the life cycle? Can we pause work, defer work, or just cancel work entirely in order to enable other work to come in? Do I need to shift work for resourcing needs or other needs that are not always just cost driven?
Mm-hmm. And Farhana, you mentioned stakeholders alignment and stakeholders engagement, but we also need an executive alignment. So I have like two parts of the question for you. Is a stakeholder alignment the same as an executive alignment, or would you do something differently? But the second part is we definitely agree that executive alignment is crucial for the success of a PMO. So how can PMO leaders build stronger relationships with executives specifically to ensure that project management aligns with the organizational strategy?
Sure. So I think it's kind of like that childish riddle of is a square a rectangle or is a rectangle a square? So for me, I include executives in my stakeholder pool for consideration, but all stakeholders are not executives. So of course you need to have executive alignment. It depends on the organization, on both informal and formal structures, how relevant executives are, depending on how high up the chain you want to go. Obviously, there needs to be executive alignment. Executives set the tone for the company, they set the objectives. Stakeholders can be at different levels, and it's important to know that stakeholders also include people who may be like operational managers or associates. They are not. It is not just exclusively someone who is in a formal management role. In terms of your second question, I think there's a lot of strategies we can take. I would start first with the portfolio leader or the PMO leader. Self-awareness is key. So think about how you work best, how you learn best, how you interact with people, what stresses you out, what kind of stress can you tolerate. And make sure that that's a fit for the organization, right? So if you are used to being in a very authoritarian organization, perhaps a startup that has foosball tables and beer pong is not the right fit for you, right? So I think it's know yourself and know where you think you can be successful. The second is to also look at your stakeholders and understand how they are oriented, right? Similarly, if you come from a beer pong, foosball type of open door culture, moving into very formal, very rigid organizations also might not be a fit. And so you might need to adjust your communication style or approach. I think from there too, I would then look at who are the people on my team and who are the people they interact with. If there's misalignment or misfit, it's on you as a leader to adjust or remediate that. Sometimes that means coaching, sometimes that means putting the person on a different portfolio. From there, I would then look at change management. So one of the practices of change management is to do stakeholder mapping. And you might not need to do something as formal as stakeholder mapping, or to do formal exercises, but you should have some sense of who are the people you work with, what are the informal and formal networks around them, how do you demonstrate competencies, who are your supporters or your friendlies, and who are your detractors. And then from there, I think the final step in that would be demonstrating continuous excellence and demonstrating value. So in that sense, you maintain the level of support you have from your supporters. And for detractors, you have to get to the root cause, demonstrate value and competency to bring up their level of comfort or to address any significant areas of concern that they might have. And that might mean that you work on your change management skills and your people management skills.
I love this answer, Farhana, and I just want to reiterate the first part, like start with yourself, because this is the key to success. And I always preach this part, despite many don't want to hear that. Many just would be like, oh gosh, again, just give me the strategy, just give me the keywords, just tell me what I need to do. But as some of you know, I even wrote the whole book about start with yourself and know yourself to be successful in the organizations. And Farhana, as you said, like if you came from informal environment to the like strict formal, you need lots of adjustments for yourself first before you start communicating with like right level of stakeholders. And sometimes it's very painful and challenging. And again, myself as an example, I never worked in a strict formal like governmental organizations because by nature I'm more like easygoing and informal, kind of like agile person, like IT agile person who doesn't dress up formal and who brings lots of jokes on, I don't know, like coffee, cookies to to the office. So that environment just simply is not for me. So thank you for bringing it up.
My pro tip is you should always show up with coffee and cookies and donuts. I don't know what it is about organizations, but somehow people love food and anything that you can do to break the ice. I think as leaders, you need to be really sensitive to things like psychological safety. How do you establish it for yourself? How do you establish it for others? And so, it's really important. You're dealing with people, not math homework.
Absolutely. And Farhana, in your case study about Canadian Bank PMO transformation, which you mentioned in your book chapter. So I just want to talk more about it and bring more ideas to the audience before they start reading the chapter. So what the specific tactics helped to shift the department from being like the least compliant to the most compliant across the organization?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's something that you pointed out in my intro. I tend to be hyper analytical. I am neurodivergent. And so I really favor data-driven insights. And I think it's, no leader wants to be confronted with anything that's like, you're not compliant, or, there's a lot to remediate that comes across very harsh. Every leader hopefully thinks that their teams are high performing, high caliber, organizations. And so I tend to try to address it by looking at what are the gaps, what can we evidence, and then put it on some sort of sliding scale to say, what is the complexity of the issue, what are root cause, how can we promote change, and how do we build adoption. So it's oddly enough that in a conversation around project management and portfolio management, we're talking about change management so much. But I do think that there's cycles there where you can leverage the related ideas around stakeholder adoption, right? So I think there's two things you can go after. One is low-hanging fruit. So for example, things like demonstrating compliance with status reporting, right? So how often are project managers completing their status reports on time? And then as you get compliance and buy-in, you can start dialing up the quality metrics and the accuracy and completion metrics. So you can say, okay, well, now that we're getting completion, we need to look at quality and say, are those status reports like high quality? Or is the PM really just going in there and like changing a period or resaving a document in order to meet the completion targets, right? So I think there's two ends of the spectrum. I think ideally I would promote doing a blend where you're trying to tackle easy, manageable change. And then you're also trying to put in, whatever the gaps are. So build in some of that complexity. So you have both cycles, you're building momentum, you're building buy-in. And hopefully that means that you're not incurring a lot of resistance along the way. But if you are, you can show people that you've got repeated cycles of saying, well, we tweaked just this one small thing. Right? Maybe we're doing reports in Tableau versus on PowerPoint. And so, we've got consistent look and feel, or we're doing small incremental change to build engagement and buy-in and confidence in larger, broader changes.
And let's talk about metrics right now. You already mentioned about consistency in sharing the information, viewpoints, tableaus, etc. But let's talk about KPIs. And I know there are maybe hundreds of KPIs, but what are the most critical KPIs that a PMO should track to demonstrate business value and help the decision makers to prioritize initiatives effectively?
That's actually a really big question. That's kind of like asking, what do you want out of life? Right? So I think on a personal level or a professional level, the question broadly is, how do you measure success? And the answer is that you look at smaller KPIs and they roll up. So depending on the organization, depending on the organizational challenge, there might be a number of different KPIs. I would tend to point to the basic ones that we always look at, right? Finance or budget, schedule, benefits, resources, scope. Those are, as project managers, that is the basis of our practice, be it if you work in an agile or a waterfall methodology. And so if you can track things like scope slippage through, say, project change reports, if you can track finance metrics, if you can track schedule changes or milestone changes, resourcing value, and then value add or benefits at the end of project, you get a very quick sense of, are we doing the right work, right? No PMO is going to hit 100% on everything. It's very rare, particularly in big organizations like a financial institution, that the work you plan to do at the beginning of the year is exactly the same as the work that you do, that you've done by the time you get to year end. There will always be shifts. There will always be organizational reasons for those changes. But generally, we should be trying to hit a higher end of that metric. So, are your financials hitting targets? Well, that speaks to things like estimation. Your financials will drive things like your value add. Your resourcing will drive things like your financials, right? If you aren't appropriately resourced, then you will need to maybe hire contractors, or you'll need to extend timelines. So everything is interconnected. And the more that we get tight on those metrics, the more we can demonstrate value, but we can also point to root cause. And some of that might be systemic organizational challenges. That's also another way that PMOs can demonstrate value. They can demonstrate organizational alignment and really drive the narrative of why project management should be considered a formal practice rather than just an operational skill set.
And I just want to reiterate, so when we're talking about metrics, KPIs, etc., don't expect to hear something new you never heard before, because as Farhana said, it's a big topic, and like KPIs are KPIs everywhere. Like you need to have a KPI on budget, you need to have a KPI on tracking time and other things from the project management triangle. So KPIs are KPIs. That is a takeaway.
Absolutely. And once we get that nailed down, we can start looking at broader things that might be more qualitative than quantitative, right? We can look at
Yes.
stakeholder engagement, team morale, completion rates, satisfaction rates, look at customer feedback. But really, the practice should be focused on those hard, old school, kind of boring, quantitative metrics.
Yeah, and something from like my side, and never overthink KPIs or metrics. Don't make them like over smart. Like Farhana said, just go to the old school book and follow, and these are your metrics. Unlike the soft skills, where every situation, every person, every team member, every stakeholder is different.
Absolutely.
And let's finish with the strategic thinking, Farhana. So, what strategies have you found to be the most effective in overcoming resistance when driving change with PMO structures, especially in highly regulated industries? And I know this is another question for another podcast, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a big topic. So I think, my background is really in financial institutions. The work that I do is often regulatory driven. And so it's really important that we get it right. I think if I look back on our conversation, not to repeat myself, but I think, it goes back to knowing yourself, knowing your stakeholders, having a good sense of what do you need to be successful, both as a project manager or as a PMO leader, and knowing what's important to the business. If you can nail down those elements, then you can identify things like root cause for issues, right? If it's a systemic issue, then it's on you as a leader to work with your stakeholders, executive teams, whoever they are, and overcome that. So things I've done in that respect are things like and facilitate training, facilitate learning and development, build communities of practice, formalize policy standards, build learning portals so that any type of project delivery tools are centralized, easy to find, easy to navigate. If it's something that is less systemic, then that's another issue too, right? So if it is, you're coming in, you're starting a PMO, and you're dealing with leaders who say, project management could be delivered by anyone. Well, then it's on you as a leader or as a PM to really come in there and demonstrate value. And you do that by showing up every day, doing the work, and it takes a little bit of stick with itness, as we were talking about before, to say, you have to somehow build rapport with those stakeholders and say, this might be hard, it's going to be a bit of change, but stick with me and I'll guide your way into learning something better. Or, if we do this work, then we can get to future state, and future state looks like, right? And try to at least move from complete resistance or a high level of resistance to at least a bit of an open mind or a willingness to change. And then if that doesn't work, then sometimes it means that you have to pull the trigger and go up the stakeholder chain and say, I've got a manager or I've got a partner that I just can't budge, help me out. Right? And help me win hearts and minds. But generally, I try to overcome that with some of that stick-with-itness, data-driven insights, demonstrate value, and just kind of suck up the resistance for a little bit.
And I will probably say the obvious thing, but when I was younger, I didn't pay much attention there. And I also talk and coach many project managers or scrum masters or product owners in IT. And Farahana, you said you need to do what is the most helpful for business. And in order to do that, you need to know what is the business first.
Right.
And it appears that many people don't know, don't have enough knowledge about the business your organization is operating. So my recommendation is, especially if you are new for organization, or if your work, you might feel like I'm not like an executive, so I don't need to have the specific knowledge of business. No, know business first. And by knowing business, also know your competitors, know your product, know your competitors' products, and know your customers, because you build your business, you build your products for people. So when you know all of that, it's going to be much easier for you to think strategically, to collaborate with stakeholders, to understand what executives are thinking about, and also to share the common North Star.
Yeah, absolutely. It's project managers are there to be the guides and the shepherds in the process, right? It's actually, if you think about the role, it's really challenging because we don't own the process, we don't own the work, we don't own the resources. And so we are using informal networks, informal guidance systems to try to usher in the future state. And so in doing that, it really is a challenge. So PMs who understand the business environments, business contexts, technology, that's how you build rapport with your stakeholders, and it's how you add value.
Thank you, Farahana. And thank you all for tuning in to the PMO Community Podcast series for this enlightening discussion with Farahana Jobanputra. And a special thanks to our volunteers at the PMO Community Podcast for making this episode possible. And stay tuned for more captivating insights and interviews in our upcoming episodes. And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated. If you find this episode valuable, please remember to like and share it. And feel free to reach out to me, Aina Alive, on LinkedIn, with any questions or requests. And for all the latest updates, make sure to follow us on our social media such as LinkedIn page, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Podbean, Samsung Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.